Welcome to a session on the United States Electoral College and the 2016 presidential election. My name is Phil Bond. I will be your instructor today. Before we begin, I would like to give you a trivia quiz. In terms of population, what are the three largest states in the United States? I'll repeat the question one more time. At the current time and in terms of population, what are the three largest states in the United States? The answer is California is number 1, Texas is number 2, and Florida is number 3. Now, if you guessed New York State, you were pretty close because up until 2010, New York was the third largest state, but Florida has been growing at a faster pace. Now, let's begin by looking at today's topics. The first topic is, what is the Electoral College? Then we will talk about the original purpose and history. We will talk about the campaign strategies used by the candidates. Because we have an Electoral College system, it does affect the way they handle their strategy for the campaign. Also talk about the 2016 election results, and then wrap up with a couple of potential changes in the works. My objective is to present the facts and to take a nonpartisan approach. I want to thank the friends and family members who provided assistance to me. The source of most of my material came from the online encyclopedia, wikipedia.org. For population, I've used the 2010 census figures and rounded most of the numbers to thousands. For example, if you see a number that looks like 5,304, it's actually 5,304,000. That happens to be the population of Minnesota in 2010. Size of states always refers to population. A little trivia fact, what do North Dakota and Alaska have in common? Well, their populations are very similar, but yet they are among the 7 smallest states in the United States. A key assumption that I've made is that the third-party candidates did not affect the 2016 results. The third-party candidates did receive about 6% of the popular vote, but they did not have a significant impact on the electoral vote. And I have not included the third-party candidates in the charts that we will look at. Now let's do an overview of the presidential elections that have occurred. There have been 58 presidential elections. The first was in 1788, and then every 4 years since then. The popular vote and the electoral vote have been different only 5 times out of those 58 elections. 3 of those times were in the 1800s, but 2 were amongst the last 5 presidential elections, so things may be changing. The chance of a popular vote and the electoral vote being different is greater when the contest is close. Now we will describe the Electoral College more specifically. The Electoral College was established by Article 2 of the Constitution to select the president and vice president. Each state has electors equal to the total of U.S. senators and representatives. For example, Minnesota has 2 senators and 8 congressional districts. So Minnesota has 10 electors. The Constitution bars federal officials, either elected or appointing, from being an elector. For the most part, in today's situation, the electors are people who are not necessarily well known, but are party activists in their individual parties. Each state can use whatever method they choose, but most states currently allow each party to come up with a slate of electors. And then depending on which candidate wins, then that party's electors are the ones who will do the actual election in December on the selected date for elector voting. The term college can be confusing. Most of us think of a college as a place where there are teachers and students and possibly some buildings. But there are another definition for college. An alternate definition for college is an organized body of persons engaged in a common pursuit or having common duties. In the United States, the Electoral College has the duty of electing the president and vice president. Other examples of use of the term college: in Belgium, an electoral college is used to elect representatives to the European Parliament. In India, the Electoral College is used to elect the president and vice president. And then when there is a need to elect a new pope, the cardinals that gather in Rome is called the College of Cardinals. All of these are using this definition you see. Now let's look at the Electoral College requirements. The Constitution states that a candidate must receive a majority of the electoral votes to become president and vice president. A majority is 270 votes, and this is calculated as shown on the slide. There are 435 in effect representing the U.S. representatives, 100 for U.S. senators, and 3 for the District of Columbia, giving a total of 538. The majority of that number is 270. And it has been that number for more than the last 50 years. The U.S. representatives decided to not increase their size beyond 435, which they had reached by 1911. The U.S. senators reached the size of 100 in 1959 when Alaska and Hawaii were added as states. The District of Columbia in 1961 was added by the 23rd Amendment. Prior to that time, people in the District of Columbia were not allowed to vote for president. People who live in territories such as Puerto Rico, Guam, are not allowed to vote for president. The Constitution requires a census every 10 years. And this census determines how many representatives each state will have. Any changes in population between the two censuses is reviewed to decide whether there should be more or fewer representatives. This process is called reapportionment. We will now look at the reapportionment that was done in 2010. There were a total of 12 congressional seats that changed sides. If you look at the right side of the slide, you'll see the happier states, and I've grouped them by major section of the country. In the South, Texas gained an amazing 4 additional congressional seats, Florida 2 additional seats, and then 1 each in Georgia and South Carolina. In the West, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Washington gained seats. The places losing seats is on the left side. In the Midwest, Ohio lost 2 seats, and then Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, and Missouri lost 1. In the Northeast, New York State lost 2 seats. Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania lost 1. You will note that the sides generally winning seats are the South and the West. The sides losing seats are the Northeast and Midwest. An exception to that is in the South, Louisiana lost 1 seat. That was primarily due to Hurricane Katrina, which occurred in 2005, devastated the state, and as well as many deaths occurring from that weather event. Also interesting to note that California, the largest state, did not either gain or lose in 2010. Their growth was probably very similar to the rest of the country. To better understand the electoral system, I've created an example using 4 states. I've selected Minnesota and 3 nearby states, and we'll look at that now. The population figures are shown in thousands, so Minnesota's population of 5,304,000 is greater than the other 3 states. And I've shown the number of electors for each of the 4 states. If we take a minute to just add the 2 Dakotas, we find they have a combined population of about 1.5 million and a combined 6 electors. Now, Iowa has a population of 3 million, or twice the Dakotas, but they also have 6 electors. If we combine those 3 states, we come up with a population of 4.5 million, which is still less than Minnesota. But you will note that the electors combined are 12 electors. For example, if everybody in Minnesota voted for candidate A, and everybody in the other 3 states voted for candidate B, then the popular vote winner would be Minnesota's candidate, but the electoral winner would be candidate B from those other 3 states. This gives you a feel for the fact that it's quite possible, but not necessarily, quite possible for the electoral vote to be different from the popular vote. Now we will expand this example to add 1 line for California and to show 1 extra column for population per elector. California has the largest population of any state and 55 electors. But if we divide the electors into the population, we find that they basically have 1 elector for every 680,000 in population. That contrasts with the smallest state in our example, North Dakota. You divide their 3 electors into their population and they have 220,000 people per elector. In effect, this gives North Dakota 3 times the electoral power of California. I'm sure that California voters don't feel that they have less electoral power than North Dakota has, but that is the actual case. The smaller the state, the greater their electoral power per population. Next, let's move on to discuss some of the history and purposes of the electoral system. The Constitution established the offices of President and Vice President, the senators, and the representatives. And the original plan was to have electors to select, would be selected by the states. Senators would not be voted on by the population. Instead, state legislators would vote for the senators. And that process continued for more than 100 years, wasn't changed until 1913 with the 17th Amendment, so that now senators are elected by popular demand. Representatives were always voted for as a popular vote. The Electoral College was established essentially by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. And the concept was to give the smaller states a little more power than the larger states, relatively speaking. They realized that of the original 13 states, some of them were fairly small in geographic size and were hemmed in by oceans and other states. So this was to keep everyone happy. Now they envisioned that the electors would meet at their state capitals and vote independently rather than use the winner-take-all approach. But even while they were still alive, the states very quickly adopted the winner-take-all approach because they realized this would give them more power. Let's look at Minnesota history now. Minnesota became a state in 1858 and had 2 representatives and 2 senators. Minnesota's first election was in 1860 with 4 electors. And at each census, the population increased, and so did the number of electors, until it reached a high in 1910 of 12 electors. In other words, there were 10 representatives and 2 senators. But as we saw previously, in the period of after 1910, the number of representatives became a constant thing. And so the reapportionment took effect whenever any state grew faster than other states. So Minnesota began to lose some of their congressional seats. The last change was in 1960, and it's unknown what will happen in the year 2020. However, projections seem to indicate that Minnesota may lose a congressional seat. The last part of history that we will discuss is the question related: have there been any attempts in the past to abolish the Electoral College? The most significant attempt was in 1969 and 1970. The House of Representatives voted 339 to 70 for an amendment to the Constitution. Nixon was president at that time, and he endorsed it. However, he was not a person who would actively support it. What he decided was that whatever the House of Representatives and the Senate decided, he would go along with. Now, in the Senate, they did not receive the necessary 2/3 majority for the amendment. There were a number of senators in the South and others in some of the smaller states which felt that they were better off keeping the electoral system. Also, a preliminary survey of the states indicated that 30 were in favor of the amendment and 14 were opposed to making any changes. Now, an amendment requires 3/4 of the states to approve it, which means 38 states would have needed to approve this amendment. It just did not look as if that would happen. Now let's turn to campaign strategies. The candidates tend to group states into 3 groups. Ones that they're pretty sure they will win, other states that they are pretty sure they will lose, and then a third category of states, frequently called battleground states, where they're pretty much a toss-up, and it is in the battleground states where the majority of the campaigning will take place. The Star Tribune had an excellent article on the Electoral College in their July 3rd, 2016 issue. And I have used that as the source for determining which states to call battleground states and which states to call Republican-dominated states versus Democratic-dominated states. And I should mention that when I say dominant, it means only in terms of the presidential election. It doesn't mean that the whole state is dominated by a particular party. And this is usually based on a review of how the state voted over the last 6 or 7 presidential elections. If you look at the Republican and Democratic columns, you'll see that the number of electors is, for each of them, does not reach the 270 needed to become president. So the battleground states become very critical in order for them to reach that magic number of 270. Now I'm going to expand this chart and to look in more detail at the states. I've divided the states into large, medium, and small based on the number of electoral votes that they have. Large states are I have defined as 18 electoral votes or more. Medium states, 7 to 17 electoral votes, and small states, 3 to 6 electoral votes. There are 7 states that are very large with more than 18 or more electoral votes. On the Republican side, it's Texas. Democratic side are 3, California, New York, and Illinois. And battleground states are Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. The other battleground states in the medium category are Michigan, North Carolina, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Colorado. And in the small category, just Nevada and New Hampshire. You'll notice overall there's a total of 51. There's 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And as you also recall, the larger states will generally have more strength in the popular vote, smaller states more strength in the electoral vote. If you look at the Republican and Democratic breakdown, the Democrats seem to have more strength in the larger states. The Republicans have more strength in the medium and small states. When we look at the 2016 election, we note that the Democrats won the popular vote, but Republicans won the electoral vote. And the same thing happened in the 2000 presidential election. So we can say that in a very close election, there is that discrepancy. However, the real battle depends on who will win those 10 battleground states. Next, let's look at the battleground states in their location. I've grouped the battleground states by location, and what you will note is that they are spread pretty much across the country. There's no one block that you can say these are where the battleground states are. So the candidates have to do a lot of traveling in their campaigning. The largest of the battleground states is Florida, which has 29 electoral votes. The smallest is New Hampshire with 4 electoral votes. Now let's look at the results from the 10 battleground states. I've shown on the chart both the popular vote and the electoral vote. I've listed the states in order by size. I've used red to show Republican wins and blue for Democratic wins. Most people are familiar with that from the television coverage of the presidential elections. In the popular vote, if you look down the column that shows percent win, you can see that some of the election results were very, very close. On the total lines at the bottom, however, Trump won by 20 million votes in overall from those 10 states versus Clinton of 19 million votes. Percent totals pretty close, 51% to 49%. When you look at the totals for the electoral vote, however, it's a much bigger spread. And that is because of the winner-take-all method. Trump won 108 electoral votes versus Clinton of 32 votes. I've put asterisks by 3 of the states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. In prior elections, those were pretty solid Democratic states for president. And the Clinton campaign did not consider those 3 states to be battleground states initially, and it was not until very late in the campaign process that they realized it must be vulnerable states, and it was almost too late for them to take any action. And I have included the actual numbers for those states so that you can see how close they are. Michigan especially, it was only 11,000 votes separating the 2 candidates. Wisconsin also was pretty close with 22,000 votes separating. Pennsylvania a little more with 45,000. If you add that up, it's a total of less than 80,000 votes. If Clinton had won those 3 states, Clinton would have had enough to become president. Next, we'll look at the actual electoral total, and I've also included what would have happened in a theoretical sense if Clinton had won the 3 states. On December 19, 2016, as required by the Constitution, the electors went to their respective state capital. The results was 304 votes for Trump, 227 for Clinton. Trump is well over the 270 required. If Clinton had won those 3 states that had been traditionally Democratic, it would have been a switch of 46 electoral votes subtracted from Trump or added to Clinton, and Clinton would have had the 270 votes needed to win. Now let's turn to the popular vote for a quick analysis. On this analysis, I show California as a separate state vote, and then all of the other states and how that vote came out, and again use the red and blue to distinguish. Clinton had a very huge win in California, a popular vote of 4 million. In the other states, however, Trump won the popular vote by 1.4 million. That partially offset the California vote, but not completely. So Clinton had overall a win of 2.8 million. Now let's change gears and talk about 2 possible modifications currently in process regarding the Electoral College system. The first activity is called the fairly complex name of National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It is a compact between some of the states related to what they will do based on the national popular vote. The other thing that we will discuss is something called the Congressional District Method. It's an alternative to the winner-take-all, and it's currently used by Maine and Nebraska in allocating their electors. First, we'll look at the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. 10 states plus the District of Columbia have agreed to give their electoral votes to the National Popular Vote winner. They currently have 165 electoral votes. This compact, however, will not go into effect until more states join and they have a total of 270 electoral votes. In other words, this method will override the Electoral College concept completely and assure that the popular vote winner will become the president. This process started in 2006, so it's been more than 10 years, and although there are some additional states considering it, it seems to me unlikely that they will ever get to the point where the compact will go into effect. The other potential moderation is called the Congressional District Method. 2 states use that, and now let's take a look at that. The Congressional District Method is used by 2 states, Nebraska and Maine. Nebraska has 3 congressional districts, as shown in this chart. The very smallest one on the right-hand side is actually the area for Omaha, and then it in some ways is similar to Minnesota, having some very large districts with a less population. Maine has 2 congressional districts, and actually in Maine, the 2 districts voted differently, whereas in Nebraska, all 3 districts voted in the same way. So they did not do any splitting, but Maine did do a splitting for the 2016 election. The electors are distributed based on who wins that congressional district, but the 2 statewide electors are distributed to who wins the overall state. So in Maine, 1 elector vote went to Trump and 3 went to Clinton. This method would be somewhat more significant if these states were larger. For example, in Minnesota, there are 8 congressional districts. If in a theoretical case, 4 had voted for Trump and 4 had voted for Clinton, but that Clinton had won the overall vote, then Trump would have gotten 4 electoral votes and Clinton would have gotten 6 electoral votes. Let's turn now to the advantages and disadvantages that are cited for this method. The advantages are that candidates would be forced to campaign in more states. Analysts who have looked at this have shown that in 30 states there are congressional districts that could be swing districts or battleground districts. This would force the candidates to, instead of focusing on 10 states, focus on a much larger number, 30 states. The other advantage is this does not require any change to the Constitution. It would probably require some laws, but not something as difficult as an amendment to pass. Disadvantage is that there'd probably be more gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the term sometimes used when redistricting is done for political purposes. Sometimes this is also called packing and cracking. The one change that would not occur is that there's still a possibility of the popular vote and the electoral vote going to 2 different people. However, it would provide the fact that in most cases there will be popular vote and electoral vote would be closer than the winner-take-all method. I hope this gives you a better understanding of the Electoral College system, why it was put in place, and the significance of it. And I hope you appreciate how important your vote is, not only for president, but for all of the other candidates too.